Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
I'm Mike Mateen.
And tonight we are talking about episode 4 of Survivor Winners at War. And if you give me 1 second, I have to attend to my dog for a moment. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry about that, right off the bat. We're here to talk about episode 4 of Survivor Winners at War. I feel like the season is going pretty well so far. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's all been entertaining. Obviously these are all winners, but they're all people who are interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that's helping. It also takes away a lot of I think we talked about this maybe an episode or two ago. They don't have to focus on any really exposition because we know everyone. Yeah. So you just get a lot more content because you don't have to establish who the characters are. You know, you can kind of fast forward through some of that.
Yeah, definitely. Things get off to a quicker start for sure.
Right. So, and some of that's not just because they're all winners. Obviously, they play pretty hard from the beginning, but some of it just is the nature of the way that you tell the story because you don't have to introduce all these people. You know, we're not trying to introduce 20 people to us that we don't know, and it also means that there's less tipping of like who might be going because you don't end up in that weird thing where like somebody you've never met all of a sudden gets a whole bunch of exposition so that you feel bad when they get voted off when you didn't really know anything about them yet. Yeah. And so you don't have any of those weird edits where it's like, why are they giving so much to this person all of a sudden? Yeah.
It's interesting. I wonder, I'm trying to remember the last time they did Edge of Extinction or, other ones like this because the fact that the player also doesn't completely leave the show kind of also plays into that a little bit. You know what I mean? They wouldn't need to focus as much on someone, when this is the last they're going to be on the show. It's like, well, yeah, you have to, give them a little screen time so people kind of understood who they were. But if they're sticking around. But you're right also that here it's even less necessary because we know all these people already.
Right.
For the most part. We remember some of them better than others.
Yeah. Well, and that's been a sort of an odd theme that I wouldn't have thought be something that would emerge is that the way they've started to separate themselves is the ones who have been like in the show, whatever you call it, like just back on the real world, but they're in this like universe. Yeah. Of the show, and they're connected.
It's like an ecosystem.
Yeah, like the ecosystem of the show versus the ones who played one time, went to their own reunion, and have gone back to their normal lives, and don't really get involved with it. And just something that we wouldn't have predicted, but it is telling. That they have these connections outside of the show, and that's making them targets to people who don't have those connections. So then the reaction is, well, we need to target the people with no connections so they don't gang up on all of us with connections and eliminate our connections. Yeah. And it's sort of this weird, again, because it's not anything we could have predicted would have been a theme. But it's been interesting, so.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got someone in the chat who says this season sucks since they didn't allow Richard Hatch on the show. You're entitled to your opinion, but that's kind of not how I feel about it. But
yeah, I mean, I could see people being frustrated by that, but it's not. Yeah. I mean, I think there's enough interesting people without him.
I mean, I think even if you disagree with that decision, it doesn't make the season suck.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, they're right that, you know, the idea of having a winners at war without the original winner. I mean, it's kind of a nice grace note to have if you have the original winner, but also like there's real world issues and real world people involved that, like, you know, the idea that you don't have the cherry on top doesn't mean you don't still have an ice cream sundae.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's plenty of interesting storylines that we were just discussing without him being there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I respect the opinion that it is frustrating that the original winner was not there. The guy kind of defined the show and how to play in a way that I don't think the producers anticipated.
Right, but he also was unfortunately entangled in some of the other issues that the producers, I'm sure, would like to avoid like the plague right now. Yeah. So, I mean, it just made it complicated, and certainly I think there's room to discuss whether they made the right decision or not, but that's also not anything that happened on this episode, so I don't know if we need to dwell on it further. But, I mean, you know, it's an interesting question just because some of that was behind the scenes stuff.
Yep.
But
so fair question. Yeah. I enjoy this season with it.
Yeah. So we have let's talk about some of the highlights from this episode. It was almost just a little grace note setup bit, but I really was pleased to discover that at least one of the tribes can see the edge of Extinction Beach from their beach. Like they can see it out there across the water, close enough that they could tell if there's people standing there or not.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah.
Man, that's bonkers. I wondered because it wasn't, the geography of it wasn't super clear because we saw the obvious landmark of the edge of extinction, but it wasn't clear where the other people were standing. Like, is that at their beach, or is it just like, oh, that's when they're on their way to the well or something like that? There's a spot where they can see it. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it doesn't really matter necessarily. I think our first sort of notable segment was Adam's, like, goodwill tour, going around trying to help everybody out now, chastened after the last time, which, I mean, who can blame him? I mean, I feel like, in the situation he ended up in, that's kind of exactly what you've got to do.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Mm-hmm. But then, of course, Rob probing him for information and then being able to say, well, you can decide not to tell me, but I'm just going to tell them you're telling me anyway.
Yep.
I mean, that's a tough situation for Adam, especially since, I mean, Jeremy and Michelle seemed to believe him. It is a plausible story.
It is, especially after how he behaved last time. So
yeah, it's like this. I mean, the story is he's continuing to do the thing that you were mad at him for doing last time. So yeah. Anyway, I think the big highlight of the episode, though, has to be that Edge of Extinction challenge, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think, I really enjoyed the comeback, the come from behind win in the challenge. It was kind of a second, would have been the best moment in the episode if they didn't have this whole thing happen already. But yes, that was my favorite moment of the episode, was the challenge and the response. This was one where they were still competitive with each other, but there was less of an incentive to, beat one another. And there was more of an incentive to support, which is new for out there. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of a fun change. As entertaining as it was to, watch Natalie kind of dominate them on those earlier ones and treat it, super competitively. This one, it was just a little more heartwarming to see them support each other and to see.
It really was.
Yeah, to see Ethan's, kind of worry, him going into it, with this which I love the humanity of it, because the story is supposed to be like the story that they started to set up was, I've beaten cancer, like I've done these things, like I can do. Edge of Extinction is not going to be a big deal to me, and so for him to be humbled by the challenge was just a different, like, that wasn't how you expected to see it going. And it like I said, there's a humanness to the realizing that beating cancer and being mentally tough, like, and all those things, he still is those things, but part of it is that you will physically get knocked down, and you have to take that pause, regain yourself. It's not about like, oh, I can just blow through anything because I have this mindset in this heart. He started off thinking he wanted to be first, and then he was last, and only after he had to like take a rest and like monitor himself. And there's a toughness to that that's different than the normal narrative.
Yeah,
that
you get knocked down, but you get up again. There's nothing going to keep you down.
Right. That is a lighthearted way to put it. Yes.
No, I absolutely agree though, because it, as soon as they announced what it was, I immediately flashed back to how in the earlier episodes they made a whole big point of what a hike it was to get all the way up the hill there. And so to have it be announced that you have to do that 20 times just sounded like I was immediately kind of feeling like, okay, fire token, yeah, but like at a certain point, how wiped out are you willing to make yourself for a fire token?
Well, I think that's what it became. It was less about the fire token. I don't think anybody at the end really cared about getting the fire token. I think they cared about completing the task.
Yeah.
And being able to say they did it.
No, yeah.
Too. Yeah.
Well, I guess that's my point really though, is just the idea that I kind of would have expected maybe it's just sort of my own gut reaction about what I would do, but just the feeling of like that, I'm not sure that seems worth it. It's one thing to sort of have the pride of saying you're able to do it, but like there's all sorts of things that would be really hard to do, and you could feel proud of yourself for accomplishing it, but require the expending of resources that might be more productively used elsewhere. And I don't know that that's the case here. I mean, it's not obvious what else you're using your resources for, because they're not really doing other challenges or anything like that. But it's not like when you're back at the regular beach where it's like, okay, well, you're doing a lot of work at camp, but should you be saving your energy for challenges? Those sorts of questions. It's kind of, for this, it's kind of like just that. But it's also a question of, if you have a very small amount of food, do you put yourself through an extreme workout like that? They decided they wanted to. And so, good for them. It was inspiring to see. It seemed really hard.
Yeah. Well, and then there's, what a great moment, too, at the end of the episode when Tyson arrives on the beach.
Yes.
And he goes, man, y'all got a lot of firewood. Amber's face, like, oh.
Yeah.
That was a story.
That was pretty good. I felt, it was one of those perfect moments where, like, it's not even like I'm accusing them of staging that or setting it up or anything, as much as I'm just kind of observing how it's like, that's the perfect button you want after a scene like that, so like assembling the episode in that way by, having that thing be this huge moment and then being able to have your end of the episode button on that perfect line. It's just good television making.
Yes. So.
But yeah, I got genuinely misty during that whole sequence, especially when like everyone went with him for the last trip.
Yeah.
That was really cool. Just this solidarity that they felt. But, it's also worth talking about, I think, how that solidarity that they're building there, like in some ways, that's kind of the argument against something like Edge of Extinction, is that they're having the opportunity to bond in a completely different context than the people who are still in the game.
Yeah, but they also are not able to bond with the people in the game
Yeah.
except via the trade,
Hmm.
basically.
And it's also true that only one of them is going to actually get to go back in, and
Right.
they will be an obvious target. So, I feel like there's other, there's checks and balances there.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, they could. I mean, if these, well, I guess these wouldn't all be jury members. Like, out of,
yeah, I'm trying to remember how they did it the last time. I feel like there were two tiers, right? Like there was, because Devon's got to go back in, like at the merge or something like that.
yeah.
And then there was, yeah, but then,
And then when they, yeah, and then I think they like had the ability to like opt to stay in or leave,
mm-hmm,
and a bunch of them left like right after that.
yeah.
But if you stayed in, I think you got to be on the jury.
Yeah, I don't,
Yeah,
I honestly don't remember either.
yeah. So but that's the thing is like if these aren't all jury members, then this bonding isn't necessarily an advantage
Yeah,
to them. So
that's
um,
true. So you kind of mentioned it earlier, but another certainly highlight of the episode is just that kind of stunning comeback with the challenge, right? Like they were so far behind,
yeah,
they just, but they managed to pull it together.
yeah. I mean, I think it helps. I mean, I think it was obvious that in some of those earlier puzzle making, I think Rob just wasn't clear headed.
Mm-hmm.
Because of Amber being gone. Like it was obvious that when he was laser focused on that thing,
Mm-hmm.
he, and he has an amazing ability to basically like clock what the other team's done and see where they're right and where they're wrong
Mm-hmm.
and build off of like what they've already done. So like he figured out like the first 4 or 5 pieces like he got just from like looking over at theirs and realizing what they had right. And then
Mm-hmm.
they went and found all those. And then from then on, like then they had this they picked up steam. And there was this like bizarre moment where I don't think that they were as far off as they thought they were on the other puzzle, but Nick got so flustered that he just started taking the whole thing apart. Like he just didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
I don't think he was really that. I don't think he needed to do that. I think he had enough of it correct that it could have taken a lot more subtle changes. There wasn't like this core error like down at the bottom that he had to get to. And I think so. It was interesting to see, like I said, to see them get flustered over there too, to the point where it just derailed their ability to keep their lead from a mental standpoint. Get out of there.
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly talked in the past about how a lot of these challenges really mostly just come down to the puzzle, like who's ahead and who's behind going into the start of the puzzle usually is a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of time it actually takes to do the puzzle. But certainly this was an extreme case because they were way far behind, due to just a tactical error of, maybe that you don't have the shorter members of your tribe trying to jump and grab something.
Right. I mean, yeah, and as cool as it was for Adam to like finally get it, let's not discount the fact that the other two had to give up.
Yeah. And which forced him to have to do it over and over and over and over.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so there was obviously an error there.
Yeah. I mean, good for him for finally making it, but that doesn't really change that it wasn't the smartest people to have do that part.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Although I suppose the dilemma is that, the people you don't have doing that have to be swimming and pulling the boat. So that's its own skill, right?
Right.
So I guess that was probably how that decision got made, is just a feeling of like, well, we need the strongest swimmers pulling the boat. But hey, it worked out.
Yeah, it did.
So, I mean, that was I also actually enjoyed at the beginning of it, just dubbing the bench the Sandra sit out bench, and her just like, yeah, no, I sure I'll own that.
Yeah, that's the thing that, like, that is fun to watch about her is like she's so, you know, laser focused on like the main point, and all of these like distractions are just silly to her.
Yeah.
You know,
well, yeah, her strategy.
Our job is to win the challenge. So if I can't, you know, like she doesn't say it like that, but she's like, if I'm not going to be productive in the challenge, yeah, I'm going to go sit. I have nothing to prove.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to go and be jumping and getting those things. I'm happy to sit over there if we keep winning challenges. Like,
right. And how consistently well she does by repeating the same trick over and over again, which is, I will vote for anyone as long as it's not me.
Right.
And it just continues to work. I mean, it doesn't work every time, but it works enough that she's the only one who's won it twice.
Exactly.
So, I mean, at a certain point, it's like, you know, it makes it look a little bit like, is everyone else just overcomplicating it?
Yeah, I mean, she just, she really boils it down to the essence, which is always something that's fun to see people do, you know, so.
So, as far as, you know, like the other, you know, the rest of the episode was mostly, you know, this discussion of like, well, you know, is Tyson the target, or can he persuade everyone else that it should be Nick on this whole idea of, you know, people with connections versus the people without connections, with it seeming to come down to Sandra being the swing vote. And despite saying in the episode, I like revenge, but I like $2 million more, she still votes for the side that's the revenge side. So, I mean...
Yeah, I think what the part that we probably didn't see is, you know, Tony and Sarah, you know, while they initially kind of got excited about, like, you know what, we need to keep Tyson around. He's a shield, you know, that we always have. It's like, yeah, but at what expense? You know, do we really need to fuss for, you know, the others felt more strongly about voting for Tyson than they did about keeping Tyson. So it goes to Sandra's point of like, I'm just going to vote. Like, let's just vote for the easy thing. Like, we don't need to make waves. Like, that's the thing. It's like Sandra doesn't have to make moves. Like, that's the whole thing. Like, she doesn't.
Yeah.
Point, as long as you're there at the end and you never got voted out, like, you always got a shot.
Well,
so, yeah.
the crazy kind of advantage that she has at this point, and Rob really has this too, although his play style is so different, but there's no nonsense with having to establish a resume, right? Everyone knows Sandra's resume. You could argue she has the best resume of anyone out there, having won twice, right?
The thing at the end is, I've won this twice and you let me get here.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, of course, she doesn't have to make moves. She almost has to make anti-moves. You know what I mean? She has to keep people from targeting her. So almost like at a certain point, like the lower key her game can be, the better she's likely to do. And yet that's kind of amazing to be able to avoid being drawn into all that stuff.
Right. And Rob has, like you said, a completely different tactic in that he just makes it so uncomfortable for you to even think about voting for him.
Yeah.
That you just don't, like, it doesn't enter your mind. Because it's like, well, he's going to do something. Like, well, like we talked about last episode, there was literally nothing for him to do. Yeah. Like, he couldn't do anything. You could have just voted for him.
Rob is like Kaiser Soze from Usual Suspects. You know, the whole bit of like, how do you shoot the devil in the back? What if you miss? Right? Well, it's like, that shouldn't actually be a real thing, but people act like it is, which makes it true.
Right. But he does just enough. Like, when he finds out, like, when Adam came and talked to him, like, he goes and, like, blows up Adam's whole thing. And it's just like, see, like, Rob, like, if you start, like, messing with him, like, he starts rocking the boat, and it's, like, super uncomfortable, and, like, something's going to happen. It, like, shakes things weird. And so they're just like, wow, don't, yeah, we can't vote for him.
I mean, you know, there's the joke about calling him the Rob father, right? But that whole scene with Adam really was like, you know, like the stereotypical mafia shakedown, you know. Gee, you got a nice game of Survivor going here. Would be a shame if something happened to it. So maybe you ought to just tell me what I want to know, huh? You know, maybe you want to work with me, or else I'll just tell everyone you are anyway.
Like I did last time.
Yeah.
Which is what got
yeah. But yeah, so that's some good stuff. And highlight for me was seeing that Nick voted for Kim, which made me immediately think he was so far outside the loop that he must obviously be going home. But then it turns out, nope, I was wrong. So.
Yeah, he thought they were splitting votes, or he was supposed to like. That's what he said. Like, Tyson should be the one going home. I'm only voting for you if there's an idol.
Yeah. Right, but like nobody else even really talked about that, which may mean that he was out of the loop, but it also may mean that that was just stuff we were denied seeing, you know, in the edit. So what was your favorite moment of the episode?
I mean, it had to be when they decided to join Ethan on the last trip.
Right.
When the rest of them did a 21st trip, you know, that was pretty good.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny because the favorite moment and the biggest surprise in this one are almost slam dunks, both of them, because they're such obvious moments in the episode to fit there, right? You know, so favorite moment, that moment that we just talked about, and then also biggest surprise, that comeback in the challenge, right? I mean, do you have a bigger surprise than that?
No, that was the biggest surprise, I think. Yeah. And that's why I said, like, in another episode, that would have been the best moment also. But because of how cool that Edge of Extinction thing was, I mean, those were really the two best parts of this whole, I mean...
Yeah.
And, yeah, I mean, the rest of the episode is fine. I mean, yeah, okay, they decided to vote for Tyson, who's a threat and connected to the other tribe. Like, it made sense. Like, he is friends with Parvati and Rob and that group, and he probably would have gone with them if they'd kept him around. Like, it's not a terrible vote. Like, but that's all like just inconsequential to the really entertaining parts, which were those two things, you know? So, I agree.
Yeah. So I think the other just kind of nice thing about, you know, that tribe winning is just, you know, getting the other side having to go to tribal council was nice.
Which I think I said last time that I was rooting for them specifically for this. I just, you know, I think that was one of the questions was like, hey, what are you looking forward to next week? And I said, hopefully the other tribe loses. Like, I want to see something different, you know? And we did. And it wasn't all that entertaining. I mean, it wasn't fine. It was entertaining. It wasn't that dramatic. But it was also overshadowed by just some really cool moments. Which, you know, just as a small aside, I think is part of this kind of episode is what makes me happy about our new format that we're trying. Because we can just spend time talking about those things that were really fun.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're not having to keep referencing back to like, oh, here's the things that happened chronologically and like feel like we need to cover all this stuff that ultimately, when I walk away from this episode, like those are the two things I remember, and those are the most entertaining things, and that's all I really wanted to talk about, you know? So.
Yeah. We don't really miss the other stuff.
Nah.
Yeah. I agree. So, on that note, our next segment is MVP. I feel like there's a couple of choices that you could potentially make. You know, obviously Ethan was, you know, part of both of our favorite moment, and that was really dramatic. But, I mean, you could theoretically also look at Natalie for how well she just powered through that whole thing. And her whole approach to it, too, which was nuanced compared to everybody else, which was she's already been becoming a fire token millionaire. And just that whole idea of, like, well, I've managed to build up some kind of an advantage with having more of these fire tokens. I'm certainly not going to let them narrow that gap, you know? Yep. So.
Yeah, she's just proven to be, like, a beast over there. Like. You know, I don't remember much about her other than like she had like I think it was her sister. I think they were twins.
Yeah, they're twins, but her sister was voted out pretty early.
pretty early, and I remember that sort of being the narrative, is that like it was almost like this avenging of her sister.
Yeah.
And so that I think that kind of overshadowed like how she played. And the reality is like that same tenaciousness that we were framed as, you know, revenge for her sister is just an innate tenaciousness that she has.
Yeah.
That is actually kind of fun to watch on display in the way they've set up Edge of Extinction that maybe wouldn't be showcased in the regular game in the same way. So it's kind of a nice little, to use an earlier analogy, like this is sort of a little cherry on top of like, hey, this we liked that they had this segment, because even though we normally don't like Edge of Extinction, we like that it gives these favorites time to stick around and we get more TV with them. But then we have the first person who goes there is owning the experience in like such a way that's like changed how we're viewing it in a positive way. And so, yeah, I think she's been the MVP a couple of times. I think she could easily take that again.
Yeah.
You know, I think that, I mean, Rob, like I said before, like seeing him clear-headed in a puzzle,
yeah,
it's pretty amazing to watch him work.
For sure. Yeah, that was a hell of a comeback.
Yeah, that he's only talented at sort of the social nuances of the game. Like, he is an incredible puzzle maker. He is pretty strong. You know, even though he's got kind of that dad bod thing going on now, he's still like a strong guy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And so
and that undefinable, intangible charisma, right? You know, like, and it's not even
just pick up on the social nuances. It's the like you said, the charisma that he has in those situations. You know.
Yeah. So yeah, lots of good players this week. So what about what went wrong for Tyson? We haven't really talked much about that this episode, but I mean, you know, one obvious thing is he didn't trust his gut. You know, we heard him say a couple of times leading up into Tribal Council, like, this seems too easy. Is this too easy? And the answer is yes. Yes, it was. It was too easy because that isn't what was actually happening. And so, you know, you suspected, your subconscious was trying to tell you that it was too easy, and you were right.
Right, because for the same reason that you were trying to target the unconnected players, they were targeting you as the one they perceived as the most connected and the most willing to leave this group to your previously connected group. Like, it should have been obvious to him that he would have been a bigger target. It was obvious to even the people who considered voting with him. They were considering voting with him because he's an obvious target.
Yeah, like the whole shield approach, right? Yeah,
the shield approach. So, yeah, so not trusting his gut, not seeing it from that perspective is what went wrong for him. You know, he can't change the fact that he's connected to Rob and Parvati and the poker alliance or whatever. Like, that all happened. Like, he has to do, like, you can't say that's what went wrong. Like, because Kim's managed to work through it, and it's not an issue on the other tribe. Like, they're voting out Rob and Parvati's group and Ethan because they're strong, not because they have this weird poker alliance.
Yeah.
You know, like so it's not affecting them.
They're kind of obvious big name targets.
Right.
Right. You know, it's not explicitly about those connections. And I mean, in some ways, the connections is really almost just the name that you put on it, right? Because I think what's kind of a little harder to clearly define is that some of these players are kind of bigger names than others. You know, whether they've only won once or not, you know, some of them have maybe still been on multiple seasons. They are more widely known. Their wins are more celebrated. You know, like we had that scene with Michelle and Rob in this episode where she kind of talked about how, like, you know, I'm a little insecure sometimes because, you know, my win is sometimes more considered more controversial. And I liked Rob saying, you know, that's stupid. You won, you won. You know? Although certainly there have been times where we didn't like who won. But,
Yeah,
I like that scene though.
it was a great scene, and part of what Tyson should recognize that is that he is a big name because he's a big personality, and
Yeah.
like the way that he won was very notable because he was very like he's somebody you remember.
Yeah.
Like I hadn't.
He's so tall.
Yeah, he's funny, and
Yeah.
he has this presence about him.
Yeah.
And he plays in kind of that freewheeling fashion that is also like he kind of projects. But it just makes him harder to trust because he's a big name, so he's lumped in with the other big names. I think we found out sort of subtly that he's one of Nick's idols, and that was
was it subtle? I mean, Nick kind of said so in the tribal council.
But I don't know that he specifically said Tyson, did he?
I thought he did.
Maybe he did. Okay.
I'm pretty sure he did because
talking about idols, and I don't remember him saying Tyson's name.
Well, Tyson kind of even referenced that when he decided to bequeath his fire token to Nick. That was the only thing that kind of, it kind of tied it all together.
Yeah, that's where I remember it like being. Either way, he's people's idol. He is in that echelon with the Robs and Sandras. Even he's only won. Well, obviously, only Sanders won twice, but he may have only played one time, maybe two.
I think he's been on 2 seasons, but I'd have to look. I don't feel like googling it right now.
Yeah, no, me either. But he's memorable enough. Even if he had only played one season, we would still know who he was.
Yeah.
Anyway, so his mistake was not taking all that into account and realizing he was a bigger threat and that it was too easy. So.
All right. So last but not least, room for improvement. What advice do you have for the players remaining in the game?
Well, I think I'm going to throw in, the fact that next time is a tribe merge, or not merge, switch up. It means any advice I would give is kind of premature because we don't know how all the cards are going to fall.
True.
I think the biggest sort of global advice going off of a theme we were just talking about and what Rob was trying to do is the people who aren't the bigger names need to play with the confidence and remember they have also won this game. And you saw that a couple of times. It's part of what kind of shook Nick a little bit is that he's the newest winner and he's playing with all of his idols. And that is not a winning formula for him.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to be aggressive, but have a little bit of confidence that you belong. And I think that's probably the best advice.
Yeah. I felt like I wanted to send a little whisper to Jeremy and Michelle for you're just going to take Rob's word for it. That Adam is doing his thing again. That you maybe need to be more careful about that. But the other thing is I don't think that Rob and Parvati need this advice so much because they're going to know this already. But despite them doing well in keeping themselves there so far, technically a lot of their ostensible allies are still getting whittled away. Ethan and Tyson and so on. So it's going to come to a point where they just don't have numbers. So will they still
change up what they do?
Yeah. So we'll have to see how that goes. But tribe, as you mentioned, tribe swap next week. We'll see how that goes. But otherwise, I think that probably does it for this episode.
Yep.
We're going to, be back next week for more Survivor. So try to survive until then. And if you're watching us live, stick around. We're going to be talking about movies in just a little bit. If you're not watching or listening to this live, check the website, christianaellis.com, because we will have also just put out a new Watching 100 Movies. So, try to survive until then.